Welcome back to Statement Piece. Today we have a very special guest.
DJ, TikToker, New Zealander, and all around nice guy, Isaac Hindin-Miller.
Yay.
What's up? How's it going?
Good. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
How has your day been going? How's your quarantine been going?
It's been good. I went for lunch at an outdoor cafe here in New York, and I've been hanging out with my girlfriend, and I met up with a couple of New Zealanders today, which was fun. And I went to look at a new apartment a couple of blocks away because like all these apartments are going on the market at the moment and are so much cheaper than what I'm paying. And so I'm trying to like negotiate a rent decrease with my landlord by telling him that I'm going to view other cheaper, larger apartments.
Where in New Zealand are you from?
I'm from Auckland and Christchurch. I was born in Auckland, and then I went to, we call it primary, but you guys say elementary school and high school in Christchurch. And then I came to Auckland for university, and I moved away when I was like 26 or 27. I moved to Paris first, and then I moved here.
Oh, okay, cool. Could you give a little bit of background on yourself and how you got to where you're at right now?
Yeah, I started my career in hairdressing. I got a job in a hairdressing salon when I was like 14 years old. And from a really young age, I was obsessed with like fashion and hair and all sorts of stuff like that. And I was into skateboarding, and there's such a strong element of style that goes through skateboarding. So I was always like obsessively going to the skateboarding store like every, and we only actually had three in the city that I grew up in. And I would just go like every weekend, just like one to the next, and just go through every single rack, look at every t-shirt, try on every pair of jeans, look at all the shoes. And so I was always really interested in product from a young age. And then I had this really good friend who was this older dude called Josh, who was a really good skateboarder, and he was a hairdresser. And he was like, I think you'd really like being a hairdresser. So I started training to become a hairdresser. And I worked in salons for maybe like 4 or 5 years, like while I was at school and while I was at university. And then I just got burned out because it was such like physical, difficult work. And I'd be working in salons where you'd start at 8 o'clock in the morning and you'd finish at 8 o'clock at night, and you get like a 30-minute break during the day. And you're like, my job was to mix the dyes, the chemicals and shit like that. And it was just like, it was like you'd get like psoriasis in your fingers. And I ended up actually getting mono. And I got to a point where it was like, I just couldn't do it anymore. And because I'm like significantly older than you guys, I grew up in like I was a teenager in the 90s. And it was the time in both the fashion industry and definitely in the hair industry where it was very acceptable to be treated like a piece of garbage if you were like the junior staff member. And I always aspired from a young age to work at like the top level places. So like when I was 14 years old, I got a job at the top salon in Christchurch. And then when I moved to Auckland, I did the same. And it's like, yeah, like there was no, like these people would have no problem with like cursing at you in your face. Like I even had bosses get like physical with me. Sometimes like they'd push you if you annoyed them and stuff like that, because that's how they, like they were people who had like gone through it in the 70s and 80s and stuff. And so that was the culture that I grew up in. And yeah, so after getting out of hairdressing, I started working for designers, and then I did everything in the fashion industry in New Zealand, from like working for fabric wholesalers. I helped to organize New Zealand Fashion Week, and I like started as an apprentice driving VIPs around, and then I did lots of stuff with those guys. I worked as a model agent for a year when I was like 20 or 21 years old, and booked like people on TV commercials in New Zealand. So I'd done all this stuff, and then I would go to the fashion weeks every year, and I would look at the front row of the shows, and I'd be like, how do you get to the front row? It was always about getting to the front row. And I'd see on one side there were the buyers for department stores and all the retail stores, and on the other side there were the journalists. And I always had a knack for writing, and I thought maybe this could be something that I could get into. And so I started a blog called Isaac Likes, and I was really obsessed at the time with style.com, which doesn't exist anymore, but it was kind of like Vogue, but it was a bit spicier. Like there were more new, like breaking news stories and stuff like that. And so I was like, I'm going to be like the style.com for New Zealand. And so,
My little pup.
all good. So yeah, I just decided that I was going to try and be the style.com for New Zealand. And it was going to be like interviews, breaking news, fashion show reviews
Mhm.
and all that kind of stuff. And what I found was that when you broke stories, you got like crazy amounts of traffic. And so I started chasing down stories, and I became like a investigative journalist. And that's how I like launched my career in journalism and in writing. And like 8 months into my blog, I had gotten a job at a pretty big magazine in New Zealand. And I found out this news story from a source that our largest media company in New Zealand, which owned like the most amount of newspapers, most of the magazines and stuff, was shutting down all of its websites and everything because it was 2008. It was the beginning of the recession. Everybody was freaking out, and they fired like tons of staff all in one day. And I was the person who broke the story. And the next day, the CEO of that company came out in the media and said Isaac Hindin-Miller's statements were defamatory and incorrect, and said that I was lying, right?
Mhm.
So the magazine that I was working for fired me instantly on the spot for like making defamatory and incorrect statements about one of their competitors. And they said that I brought them into disrepute and all this stuff. And it was like in the movies where you're given a cardboard box, a security guard like walked me to my desk. I wasn't allowed to talk to anybody. I wasn't allowed to touch anything. I wasn't allowed to email any files off my computer or anything like that. And I was literally like walked to the door by security. And the day after, one of the biggest newspapers like came out and was like, everything he said was correct. Like he was right.
Yeah.
And so I sued my company, and they settled out of court. But it was probably like a 3-month process. I was about 24 years old, and it was terrifying because they had these like expensive lawyers who would email me and call me and say, you're going to lose this case and you're going to have to pay our expenses as well, and we are very expensive, so be careful
Mm-hmm.
about what you do. Like it was all intimidation tactics. And I stuck with it because I really like, I knew that I was in the right. And in journalism, truth is the defense against defamation. And so I knew that I was right. And also like in New Zealand we have very strict labor laws, and they hadn't followed like the due process and like in firing me. So yeah, they settled out of court. I got a small amount of money, but it was enough money to buy me a plane ticket to go to Paris Fashion Week. And so like 2 months later, I was on a plane to go to Paris Fashion Week, and I started traveling on the Fashion Week circuit. That was January of 2009. And by 2011, I'd moved to New York City, and I was writing for the New York Times and GQ and Esquire and all the like magazines and newspapers of my dreams. Business of Fashion, all the style.com, like
Mm-hmm.
everything I ever wanted, I got. And then I realized that rent in New York is insanely expensive, and you write for these incredible publications, and style.com used to pay me $25 a story.
Oh my
And the New York
God.
Times started me off at $50 a story.
Wow.
GQ, I don't think that GQ even paid me. Business of Fashion, I would fly myself to Paris Fashion Week, put myself up in a cheap Airbnb, and they would pay me $200 a week to write stories for them. And there was no way that I was going to be able to pay my rent. And so I had to figure out other ways of working. And I'd started to develop an Instagram following, and I'd also started DJing, and I was like, okay, these are the things that I've got to devote my time towards. And I found that like you could write a story that would take you 3 days of research and interviewing 20 people and hours of writing to get paid 25 or $50 or $100 or whatever, or you could post a photograph on Instagram and get paid $2,000. And one seemed like far better math to me. So
Mm-hmm.
I pursued the Instagram, and then I got a DJing. And within about like a year of DJing at a bunch of nightclubs in New York, I started getting hired by the same fashion companies whose shows I would go to because they knew me from the shows, and it kind of like took off from there.
Wow. What a story.
See, I know you mentioned earlier the idea of breaking story. So was there a specific story that you felt like really helped your career move forward?
I mean, I wrote literally hundreds and hundreds of stories, but the one that I always remember as being like a pretty big one on the international stage was in January of 2015. I was at Milan Fashion Week, and the street style photographer came up to me and said, "Hey, this is really weird, but there's this male model who will like tweet that he's at a fashion show, and all of a sudden, like 500 girls will show up outside the fashion show." And he was like, you should write a story about this. So I called my editor at Business of Fashion. I was like, hey, I need to like go and chase this kid down. And it was Lucky Blue.
Oh yeah.
And so I wrote the very first piece of like big, like press that Lucky Blue ever had. And we organized a meetup in the Tuileries Gardens like 4 days later in Paris for his fans. And so many girls showed up that the armed guards had to come and like break it up because like people were getting pushed over. People were, like it was an actual pandemonium. And we had like a photographer there to shoot the entire thing. And I wrote this like 2,000 word profile of Lucky Blue and how he'd come from nowhere and nobody knew who he was. And like within, the matter of a couple of weeks, he was becoming like the most famous person in the fashion industry.
Through your experiences in journalism and also as a blogger, how have you seen the internet and just online presence change over time?
So one of the major ways that it's changed is that when I was coming up, it wasn't about like doing outfit photos or, like taking cute photographs. There was no Tumblr, there was no Instagram. Like when I started, I don't think that Twitter was even a thing yet, or if it was like in its extremely early stages and people weren't really talking about it. And so I was like part of this crew of like what they called like independent publishers. And we were writers, like we were journalists who were, instead of like going the traditional route, which was to get hired by magazines and newspapers, like we were trying to like compete against the magazines and the newspapers. And so the magazines and newspapers hated us because we would often beat them at their own game. And we could prove very easily that like our stories were getting more, like you'd write a story sometimes and it would get more clicks than like a New York Times story would. And so at the beginning, the editors hated us for even getting invited to shows because, they felt like we hadn't paid our dues and that we were these like upstarts and they'd, put in 20 years of hard work to get to the point that they are at. And so why should we be allowed to go after, like writing articles on the internet for a few months? But of course, like every overnight success story is like 10 years in the making and there's no such thing. Like I've seen a couple of people like really come out of nowhere and just like pop onto the scene. Like I was there. Do you guys know who Tavi Jebinson is? Yeah, so like I was there at that famous Dior Couture show where she showed up and she was put in the front row and she was wearing this like giant bow and like a famous fashion critic like had to sit behind her and like started like tweeting about her during the show and it became this like international thing. So like that stuff obviously doesn't happen anymore. I also saw the rise of street style photography. And so that kind of killed my career as a journalist because it had gone from like all the publications paying people for writing articles to like all of the money going towards photographers. And that's why like the rate started to drop so low because like, a street style photographer can make $5,000 in a week shooting for style.com or Vogue or the New York Times or whatever. And we'd get paid jack shit because like they knew that the photographs were what everybody wanted to see. So I have witnessed people's attention spans get way, way shorter, especially with the rise of Tumblr and then with the rise of Instagram. I've seen, people go from working retail jobs to earning literally over $1 million a year just from posting on Instagram. And I think now, as far as I can tell, and I could be wrong, but like we're starting to see the decline of Instagram and the decline of like the fashion influencer as, like as we had seen them, as they were. And I think that like the really big influencers are starting to have to like do their own brands and put out their own products and create their own companies because they're not going to be able to survive just with, like photographs of themselves anymore. And, like the 1980s, for instance, were like real over the top, excess, big hair, flashy designer, like all about like plastic and all this stuff. And then the 90s were very like grungy and raw and like way more about like keeping it real. And the 90s were like a direct, was like a direct reaction to the 80s.
Right.
I think that TikTok is like the 90s compared to Instagram being like the 80s, where Instagram is all about showing this fake perfect version of your life that doesn't exist. And TikTok is all about like keeping it real and not necessarily having like a perfect face of makeup or a great outfit, but just like having something interesting to say. And so now we're seeing the rise of this like completely new thing, which is all like personality driven and everything. And I mean, that said, of course, we have these people who have become famous overnight for like dancing, but TikTok is also so specific to like what you're interested in. I actually don't get a single dance on my TikTok algorithm. I only get people like talking to the camera.
Yeah, yeah.
I've been thinking about this a lot because I am pretty active on TikTok and follow like the TikTok gossip and stuff like that. I was watching Dixie D'Amelio's Chanel Fashion Week video earlier, and I think it's interesting because she's not really quite so in your face as influencers normally are. Like, she's very casual and the production is high quality, but she's usually just like wearing a bun and sweats and things like that. So it is kind of interesting. And then also I saw the news that David Dobrik got $4 million in VC funding for his new David's Disposable app. And I think that also shows what you mentioned. People are starting to launch their own products off of their brands because they can't monetize just on content creation anymore.
And did you also see this week that David Dobrik's Register to Vote initiative, where he like was giving away Teslas? They had 100,000 people register to vote, which is like the biggest. It's the biggest like individual registration of any person in American history. Like, it's the biggest push to register, which is incredible. And David Dobrik also wore an "I Like You" t-shirt this week.
Wow, that's awesome.
What made you start your own TikTok account?
So I have like I can't even say I have a love-hate relationship with Instagram. I have a hate-hate relationship with Instagram. I cannot stand Instagram. And I had a wave of success through like 2014 to 2017 where I made like the bulk of my income off Instagram. But it really messed with my self-confidence, and like every time I'd post a photograph and it would perform badly, I would feel like a useless piece of shit, and I would hate myself, and I would literally be like walking down the street feeling embarrassed. Like it got to the point where I was literally like walking down the street being like, everybody's looking at me and they think you're the most embarrassing person because your photo did badly. Like, that's how stuck in my head I was about it, which is ridiculous. Trust me, I know how ridiculous that sounds. And but yeah, it really like did a number on my self-esteem, and I got to a point where it's just like, it doesn't matter how much money I'm making off this, it actually makes me miserable. And so I devoted all my energy to DJing, and my agent Emma kept on saying to me like a year and a half ago, maybe even 2 years ago, like, get on TikTok. Your personality is perfect for TikTok. Like, forget about Instagram. You hate it. Get on TikTok. And I was so like dark on, I was so like over social media at that point that I was like, I'm definitely not going to download another app. And so I didn't even look at it. And then finally, I don't even know like how it happened, but in September of last year, I finally downloaded it and I started looking through it. And within about 3 days, I was like, oh yeah, no, this is like really good and really, really different. And I started posting videos and nothing really, really worked. And I was like trying all these different things. And then I had one video that hit in like December, and it was an unboxing video when ASMR became a trend for like 3 days. And it was my unboxing video, and I'd like forgotten to put a song on it. And so like, it was literally like the sounds of me like ripping the stuff open and like cutting it and everything. And it like, within an hour, it had like 35,000 views, and then like 70,000 views, and then 100, and I was like, holy shit, like this is epic. And so then I was like, kept on trying to like get those numbers again. And it didn't happen for me for ages. And then at the beginning of quarantine, I was like, I have nothing to do. Like, I have absolutely nothing to do. And if I don't have any form of structure, I'm going to go out of my mind. And so I set myself this like routine of making a TikTok every day. And the first one that hit during quarantine was I did that blinding lights dance where you have like 3 of yourself. I did that, and that like that hit real big. And then, that one. And then I just like, I had this like string of luck. Like, the next like 10 videos that I did all got between like 50,000 and like 500,000 views. And I was like, this is the best feeling ever. Because I'd gone from like losing so much on Instagram, like losing followers, likes going down, like feeling bad about myself, to like all of a sudden I was on this winning streak, and it just felt so good. And so I just like put all this energy into TikTok. And I just think that like I don't know. I just find it so interesting. It allows me to keep up to date with what young people are into. I discovered so much new music because of it, and which is so helpful for me as a DJ as well. Because like I don't listen to the radio. I'm not really out there like like researching that much. And so people like Kanye West, they keep like young people around them to show them what they think is cool, because what young people think is cool is generally like what is like trending for the entire world. And so all of a sudden it gave me like an insight into what young people were listening to, eating, talking about, what they care about, what hurts their feelings, like all this stuff. And I was like, damn, this is like an educational experience. And I think also because the TikTok algorithm is so clever, like you only get served stuff that you're interested in. And so, yeah, like I don't see anything about like Charlie or Dixie. I don't see anything about Addison Rae. I don't see any of those influences. I've never seen a single Sway House video. I have never seen any of that stuff. Like all I see is people like talking, like talking to the camera, comedy, like, I don't know. And so, and I could like sit on there every day for an hour and just be so entertained.
Mm-hmm. What do you think makes your TikToks popular?
My accent. I think that as I got older, because I'm 36 years old, right? And I think that as I got older, I kind of got far more comfortable with the fact that like I'm a weirdo, like everybody's weird. Everybody is like peculiar in their own way. And I'm definitely peculiar by like most people's standards.
Mm-hmm.
And when in the early days when I first started scrolling through TikTok, a bunch of Gary Vee videos popped up for me. And I will never forget this because I thought it was the best piece of advice. Gary Vee was getting interviewed by a bunch of college students and they were like, how can I be successful on TikTok? And he said, that weird version of yourself that like only your mom and your sister and maybe like your best friend sees. If you can do that for the camera, you will win because nobody else can do that. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, I'm going to be the version of myself that like my mom sees, like mm-hmm. I'm going to be the weirdo that my friends see. And I started doing that. And I think that like, the other good thing about TikTok is you get responses very, very quickly. So like people will comment and be like, oh my God, the way he says the word plant, because, I've got a New Zealand accent. So I don't say, I love house plants. I say, I like plants. Right. And so the first time I ever said plant, I had like 100 people comment, did you hear how he said plant? So the next like 20 videos, I said the word plant. And so like I did all these things and I tried out all these different things, and it was literally like you're getting this like user feedback immediately, and I would just try to cater to the things that they were talking about. Like when I first started showing my girlfriend on my TikTok, I started calling her my associate, and the amount of people who would comment on the fact that I called her my associate. And so I started making all these videos where I'd like just keep on calling her my associate. And I feel like it's the same thing with like anything you do. Like like when people give you positive feedback, you kind of like go towards the positive feedback. And I think that that's just worked for me. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then also, sorry, like I guess the one other thing I would say is that like, because I've lived in New York City for such a long time, and because I have been part of this like nightlife scene for a long time and the fashion industry, like I have found it quite easy to troll cool kids, like cool downtown New Yorkers who go to these very specific nightclubs, these very specific restaurants, who like shop at, specific boutiques. And by trolling them in very specific ways, like I found this like audience that was like real into that specific content as well. And I think that's the other thing that's really cool about TikTok, is that you can have the weirdest niche and there might be a million people out there who are obsessed with that one particular thing.
Yeah. Like every TikToker that we've talked to kind of has a different domain within the TikTok world. So everyone's domain is so different. And even the way how they conduct with their audience.
I know you mentioned kind of how you built out your TikTok following, but then with Instagram, how did that contrast? Because you said you were trying to build out your Instagram following and use that as a source of income. So how did you kind of go about becoming an influencer?
Because I was technically a blogger, right? Mm-hmm. So despite the fact that I was like a journalist, because I had a blog, I was like lumped in with the other bloggers. And so I guess in like 2013, I got invited to this brand dinner and it was all with only blogs. It was like, usually I would go to places with editors. I would get invited to places with editors, but this was only other bloggers. And I met a bunch of guys, and they were telling me like how they make their money. Like they take photographs of themselves on the corner of the street wearing a cool outfit, and brands were paying them for it. And I was just like, damn, that's wild. Like, and then I heard some of the amounts that they were making, and I was like, damn, that's really, really wild. And so they were like, why don't you come and shoot with us? And I got a couple of friends, these guys, Marcel Flores and Moti Ankari, who are two really, really big men's influencers in America and New York. And I started shooting with those guys, and they taught me how to pose, how to like take photographs that like work for Instagram. And it was at that time just kind of like how TikTok's in that perfect moment right now where like everybody's hungry for, you know, like to find new people, and they want to follow as many people as possible, and, you know, and see as much newness. It was like Instagram was like that at the time. And so it was really easy to like grow a following. And then I did a shoot with Gucci in the early days, like in 2013, and Gucci posted me like on their Instagram, like just a photograph of me in a Gucci outfit, like on their feed. And I got like, in a day, I got like 5,000 followers out of that. And then I had a bunch of things like that happen. And then I started shooting a lot with this photographer, Kat, in NYC. And at the time in 2014 or 15, she had like 300,000 followers. And then within like 2 years, she had like 1.5 million followers. And every time we would shoot together, you know, like the first minute you'd get like 100 new followers, and then like within, you know, like you'd just get like build up thousands and thousands of followers that way. And so like those were kind of like the main ways that I got followers. And then in 2016, I went on a trip to Italy, and I was put in the same hotel with Ami Song, who was like, you know, Song of Style, JC Dupree, Ami's sister Dani, and like a bunch of these like massively famous, Louisa.
So all the like original influencers.
Yeah. Like, and I was the only guy on the trip, and I was with all these girls, and they would like post photographs with me, and boom, you know, like my following would increase so much. And yeah, so I guess like I had all these like lucky kind of things. And then it was also just the fact that you had to be incredibly consistent about, you know, posting. Like when I started my blog, I set this goal for myself that I was going to do 3 articles a day, 7 days a week. And I did that. Like the first year, I wrote like 900 articles. And the same thing was true like when I got into Instagram, and I was like, okay, I'm going to like actually try to make this a business. Like the goal was to do like 3 proper photographs a day.
Yeah, it's interesting because we've had, I don't know if you know Young Yosa. He's known for the Pissing Off My African Parents series.
Oh, I love that guy.
Yeah. So we had him on for an episode. People like him, he was like you, like very strategic with his TikTok creation because he has a business. And so he wanted to gain traction for his retail company. So it's interesting to talk to people like him and you that have this very purposeful content creation.
I think that like anybody who's growing, who's like really doing it, is being very strategic about what they're doing. Like when I saw how people like Ami Song worked, like, and I've been on trips with, you know, like Danielle Bernstein, with Xenia Adance, with, you know, I've hung out with like all of those like massive girls. Like they are working equally as hard, if not way harder than like anybody who does 100 hours a week at Morgan Stanley. You know, like they are approaching, like they create this like version of a life that looks like it's like, oh, I'm just stepping, you know, I'm in Paris and I'm just like stepping out onto the street, like, you know, for a photograph. But they are spending like 14 hours a day taking photos, editing, having coffees and lunches and dinners and drinks with different PR agencies from the big brands, so that they make sure that they get invited to the show the next season. Like, and to, you know, they're like building those businesses. And then they have like full business development meetings. Like there's nothing by chance about any of this stuff.
We read some white papers that were published by High Snobiety, and they were talking about sort of this like mass advertising through influencers, which I think was trending like a couple of years ago, now kind of wards customers off of the product. Have you seen that yourself? How do you think is like the best way for companies to go about it in the future?
So I have always had this, it's funny because I had lunch with Hey and You yesterday, who was the VP of client services for High Snobiety, and she was talking about all this stuff. And I actually did a sponsored post today for High Snobiety, like on my Instagram. And what I have been thinking for a really, really long time is that it makes so much more sense for brands to sign like influencers as ambassadors in the same way that like you associate Michael Jordan or LeBron James with Nike, right? And so then you only see these people promoting this one brand or like two or three brands. It's authentic because it's like, hopefully it's an authentic relationship. It's a company that they really love and that they are really into. I don't know that it's working like it used to. And also I think that for the most part, people aren't really, well, I don't know about girls, but like, I don't think guys certainly aren't looking to influencers for what to wear. I think guys are looking to ASAP Rocky and Lucas Sabat and Tyler, the Creator, and Kanye, you know, like for what to wear, you know.
Yeah.
So things have changed. Things have changed a lot, and also because all these celebrities have their own social media channels now, like you can just see what they're, you know, you can see what they're wearing.
Yeah.
So then on the other side of things, as the designer and owner of the I Like You merch line, how have you tried to strategize ambassadorships or representation for your brand and media?
My strategy in the first couple of years was to like gift it to all my influencer friends and, you know, hope that they would post it and stuff. And I did that and it really didn't move the bottom line at all for me. Like it really, really, really didn't work. I also think that like the brands that you see that pop off real quick, like Mad Happy, for instance, is a really good example, or Cherry Los Angeles, like those brands like have the Kardashians and the Jenners and the Hadids wearing it, you know, wearing them. And I think that like outside of those very specific, you know, families, it's difficult to have something pop off like crazy, unless, you know, once again, unless you've got it on like ASAP Rocky on, but like those girls, I think, are the ones that really, really are like moving product in, you know, in 2020. The thing that's worked the best for me as a marketing strategy has been giving out stickers for sure. And I have given out like 12,000 stickers or something like that. And that's the thing that like, that has really helped business the most, I think.
I think I read an article that said that you first gave out stickers to people that you interviewed for your blog.
Yeah. And I Like You was the last three words of every single blog post that I wrote. It was at a time, especially like back in the old days of blogging, where like you would click publish on an article and these anonymous keyboard warriors would come into the comment section and just go wild, and they would say the most like horrendous, like vitriolic, hateful stuff. And you could be writing like a really nice article about somebody, and their ex-girlfriend or boyfriend or the kid that they had been bullied by in high school would like pop on and like anonymously would just say the craziest shit. And so like I Like You was we'll call Isaac Likes, obviously, so like I Like You, Isaac Likes, but I Like You was my attempt at like injecting one little last bit of positivity into the mix before they came and played, but it never worked. And yeah, so like when I was traveling around Paris and everything and going to the fashion weeks and I would interview people, I made these little I Like You stickers and I gave them to people so that they would have the URL of my blog. But every time I gave somebody a sticker, they'd always be like, "Oh my God, the sticker! Like, I love the sticker." And if I'd been clever, I would have done something with it at that point, but I didn't do anything with it for like 8 years. And I had been one half of a DJ duo with this girl called Jenny, and we stopped working together, and I needed a way to differentiate myself in the market as like a solo, you know, as a solo performer. And I was like, oh, maybe I should bring back those I Like You stickers and give them out to people at gigs. And if people in Paris liked it when I gave them an I Like You sticker, people in New York loved it. Because, you know, like Americans are so positive. Americans are so like, you know, like Americans love this stuff. And so, and like, it was like, I would get this huge response. And so, you know, like everything, like I've said, like anytime I get a big response, like I keep doing it. And yeah, so like I made some t-shirts, and at the beginning it was basically like a merch line, but now I've got a team and we're growing it into a full-scale clothing brand.
I see a difference in the style of networking in entertainment versus like finance, because I've worked in finance in the past, and then also tech, because now I'm going into tech. So it's kind of interesting. How have you seen like differences in networking or approaches and things like that?
It's more like the differences that I see are cultural. Like in America, you can be really in people's faces. In New Zealand, you cannot be in people's faces. And like, if I have New Zealand friends who listen to me talking on this podcast where I'm like saying all the things that I've done and, you know, like the ways that I've been, you know, like I've managed to be successful, they would be like, you're the most arrogant piece of shit I've ever heard. Like, you should be ashamed of yourself, because in my culture, like, we're not supposed to talk like this. But in America, you have to sell yourself. You have to, you know, like you have to like knock on doors. You have to be able to like pick yourself up after people push you over and say no. My business partner on I Like You is this guy called Ayush, and he comes from the a consulting background. He works for one of, you know, like the big consulting companies like BCG and
yeah,
it's really not like it's not my world at all. And I met him at a dinner party through another friend of mine, this girl called Pearl. And when and she works in consulting as well. And when I asked her, like straight after dinner, I was like, oh, that kid was really clever. Like, I think me and him should have lunch. She was like really shocked that I'd like just straight up asked her to introduce me to him. And she was like, oh, I mean, I'll have to check to see with him to make sure that he's okay. And it's like, in my world, if somebody's like, oh, can you put me in touch with that person? You put them in touch with that person.
Yeah.
And I really have always believed that like you can't be jealous with your contacts, you can't be jealous with your ideas.
I am more kind of down the medical route, so it's like completely unrelated. Like there are people who just don't want to help you out, don't want to give you notes or whatever it is. But my family's philosophy is kind of like, if you can help someone out, why not? Like you have nothing to lose.
Don't get a tattoo until you're like old enough to not make a stupid mistake. I don't know. I think that the thing that I've really learned, it's cool to be like nice to people. It's cool to be a good person. We all know people who are successful and have bad reputations because people talk about them all the time. I've worked with people who are unbelievably successful and incredibly kind, and remember people's names and are generous with their contacts and introductions and stuff like that. Like also, if you really, really, really want to be like successful, like very successful, and I don't even consider myself like very successful. I think I'm like marginally okay, but like I'm friends with people who are very successful, right? And I don't want that life. So like, be careful what you wish for, because like you'll probably get it, and it might not be, you know, like it might not actually be what you want. The things that scare me are like every teenager, like the number one job of choice for teenagers now is like influencer or YouTuber. But I think that if people actually knew what it was like to be famous and knew what it was like to be one of those people who, like, I was just listening to the David Dobrik podcast, and he had like numerous stalkers this week who like they had to call the police because people were showing up at his front door and like keying his car and having like mental breaks and stuff like that. Like, you don't want to live like that. Nobody wants to live like that. You guys seen that Avicii documentary about that DJ Avicii? It's on Netflix. There's this incredible thing in there where he says that he became the most successful DJ in the world. He had his own private jet. He was traveling around the world playing to sold out stadiums of 50,000 people. He made more money than he would ever be able to spend in multiple lifetimes. And he was miserable because he realized that he'd been chasing somebody else's idea of happiness.
One last question that we always like to ask our guests is, what is your favorite statement piece, fashion wise, or it can be non-fashion wise?
I mean, I love a good pair of boots. Like I was with a bunch of friends of mine today who are far wealthier than I am, and they were talking about how they love how like you can wear sweats and then be wearing a Rolex, and then people like know that you're like there's something about you. Like I don't own a Rolex, but I like that philosophy of like you can wear like kind of shitty clothes, but if you have that one really good thing, and for me, like I love a really good pair of boots. Like you can be wearing like shitty jeans and like a t-shirt, but we be wearing like really good boots, and it's like it really makes an outfit. But I have this one jacket that like actually I have two things that I really love, and I'm going to show them to you. Okay, it's a velvet teal jacket, and it's kind of like shimmery.
Oh wow, I love that.
And then I have this as well, which is a hand knitted sweater made by a friend of mine in New Zealand.
Oh wow.
And every time I wear that, people are like, holy shit, because it's like you can do stuff when you hand knit something that like you could never do with a machine. And so yeah.
Well, yeah, thank you so much for being on the podcast and talking about your career. It's really, really interesting. I think you have a lot of good advice.
Yeah. And great stories. I feel like you've experienced so much.
Well, I'm old.
Not that
Oh,
old.
Yeah,
and
not that
and
old.
I will say one other thing is that, contrary to what you might think, life only gets far better as you get older. Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate it. And have a great day, okay?
Yes,
You
you too.
too.
All right,
Bye.
bye.
Bye.